Hey, everyone.
Hey, Peter Parker. You got something for me?
I had to beat an old lady with a stick to get this.
Okay, send out the countdown clock. And here we go.
10, 9, 8,
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Around the world, alienation is happening. It is described as an epidemic. That might even be an understatement. Joining us on Secrets to Surviving Alienation is a targeted parent with an extreme story about parental abduction, alienation, and survival. Joining us now from halfway around the world is Amit Lau. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I don't want to over dramatize the scenario that you have made us familiar with in sharing your story, but you're extraordinarily courageous. And in fact, in some ways, your story is painfully typical. Millions of people around the world, millions of children around the world are the victims of an alienating scenario. We reached out to you to share your story, to shed light on this. Tell everybody what's happened in your particular circumstance.
Well, myself, as well as the mother of my children, I have two daughters. We were born, and both of us were born and raised in California, but are of Indian ancestry. So we had moved to India to just work on some businesses, and I was doing a master's program over there. We got tied up with some partners and in some business dealings, and they got involved with some financial improprieties, and at some point along the way, they decided targeting our family was the way to go about it. And at some point, the mother of my children, I guess, flipped at some point because they were related to her. And we started getting threats and all these things. I sent her back to the United States. That's where family members went over there. They took my children back to India. Then in the middle of the night, woke me up, arrested me in front of my kids, dissolved all my assets, and I never saw them again. That was 4 years ago, as of day before yesterday. So then I had to figure out how to navigate, the reality of parental alienation. And I think one thing is most of the targeted parents I know, the first time they learn about parental alienation is when it happens to them. And that makes it even more difficult for people outside of that experience to even know what's happening. I didn't know the term. I didn't know anything at all. And then I had to navigate the world of, dealing with the prospect of courts in India and jurisdiction and learning about abduction and trying to survive going through all of that. So I've been going back and forth between the United States and India, trying to understand the landscape, and in the process of gotten involved in activism, a lot of it online, which is how I met you guys. And so that's kind of where we are right now.
Would you help paint the picture for us of how something so destructive, devastating, powerful, and global can exist hiding in plain sight for most families, for most people? How is it that most of us had no idea this existed?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that people think that this is just a domestic issue, a private affair, when in reality, it's not that at all, because it relies on the courts and the court systems and jurisdictions and government institutions to facilitate it. And the consequences bear on society as a whole, because if you look at statistics involving not only the parents, and when the dissolution of the partnership happens, both of them are impacted negatively economically. Their potential undermined. A lot of them end up in court. A lot of terrible things happen to those people, but the children themselves are at risk for all kinds of destructive behavioral issues that can sometimes be lifetime. It's just that people feel like, this is some sort of, again, private domestic issue, and they don't want to get involved. It just seems like something they don't want to talk about or think about or hear about.
Like he said,
so,
she said.
Right, exactly. So it's just like, if your friends are fighting, you don't really want to get involved in that. It's like a couples thing, etc. And somehow that extends to the children, because it does feel like a private thing. And in some ways it should be a private matter. But the truth is the remedy is forced upon us in the courts. And the courts are unfortunately influenced by special interests. Like in the United States, as an example, divorce is a $50 billion industry. And the result is 22 million children have only access to one parent. And those have devastating effects. And we're starting to see those manifest. People talk about things like, school shootings and violence and even drug use. And the correlation is much stronger with the dissolution of family than it is with, the ratio of gun shops and things like that. And so people have just been looking for any excuse except for the one that's in front of our faces, because of the fact that it kind of feels like it's a private thing. No one wants to interrupt a couple fighting. But when it relates to children, it's a completely different situation happening. And it's just difficult for people to understand. Like, it's not an issue that people want to cross over. If we're talking about migrant families at the border being separated, that's something that's easier to have a discussion about and make it onto the cover of Time magazine. But when you talk about 22 million children who have been separated due to the court system, that's a problem. And again, the special interests kind of want to protect that.
Why?
Well, it's in their interest. See, if you look at Child Protective Services and these bureaucratic institutions, they're profiting off of the fact that we have these issues. If families were forced to resolve these issues privately or through other means, then these institutions themselves would no longer be funded. If we had a system where it wasn't so adversarial, where people weren't fighting over custody and spending tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, then, these lawyers also wouldn't be making that kind of money. So really it comes down to dollars.
Take us back to the moment your activism was activated.
Well, I would say what happened to me was, as soon as I lost everything, I was kind of in a state of shock. And I'd gone from living in a really nice apartment with businesses and vehicles and just a comfortable life to literally sleeping in some rented room in some rundown part of India, not knowing the language, having nothing, no furniture. I just slept on the floor for like 3 weeks. And the hopelessness that came with that was very profound. I mean, I was just like, it was a blur for the first 3 months.
And can I interrupt you? May I interrupt you there?
Sure.
When people hear stories like that, to reconcile that highly illogical scenario, we tend to add judgment.
Definitely.
Things like that don't happen to good people. Things like this don't happen to good parents. They must have done something. Right. Certainly, judges don't get it that wrong. Our belief and faith in institutions and humanity are the ultimate gaslighting. Will you talk about that sad fact of all this?
Definitely. I mean, there's this system kind of rewards this first mover effect. So whoever makes the first move to, separate a family or do something dramatic or make false accusations, which is also known as the silver bullet, all of these things are rewarded with instantly they have, custody of the child. All it takes in reality is for you to say that you don't feel safe around a parent who you might have been living with up until that moment. And then you can get a restraining order. During the time of the restraining order, you no longer have access to the child. And now you've set precedent of custody for the other parent. And it's as simple as that. That's all it takes to lose access to your child.
And
right.
The veracity of that is not meaningful in most jurisdictions.
Unfortunately, it's not. The other problem is because the courts, these specialized courts, family court, they don't require due process. They reward perjury. These are major things. It's like vandalizing justice in a way. The justice system does not exist in these specialized court systems. And by using so-called confidentiality matters and, shutting down access to what's even happening in the courts, so we don't even know what's going on, they shield themselves from any sort of, scrutiny.
This sounds diabolical. It sounds intentional. Is it getting worse, or is it a function of the culture in the world today where truth is on trial?
I think it is a function of the world today. We live in a world of fake news and all kinds of manipulation. And, as we have this globalization happening, a lot of countries are taking cues from other countries. Like India is a good example. Now they're starting to have some of the problems because they've been borrowing some of the, rhetoric and language from the West. And that's pervading over here as well. And I think that it's getting worse in the sense that it's more entrenched than ever before. If you were to call up like business is booming for the lawyers, and, take child support as an example. If you're giving child support and federal funding is matching dollar per dollar, isn't that an obvious incentive for these systems to keep going?
Wait. What did you say?
So there's a matching aspect to child support in the US. So basically, if you're forced to pay child support, half of that money is going to the government to run these institutions, these so-called, caseworkers and psychologists and all these people who, if they said everything's fine, or if they did some sort of, 50-50, let's say, where you don't even need child support. In theory, if you had 50-50 custody, you wouldn't need child support. One parent takes care of half, the other parent takes care of their half. That doesn't really benefit the government, right? But when you shift it over, now one parent no longer has to necessarily work as much because they can take money from the other person, and they're incentivized to do that because of that. But then the government's incentivized to encourage it because of the matching of the federal funding.
I can contest to that. I just got a letter in the mail from them, and I'm married and live with my wife and kids. They're so money hungry.
Right. So, we have these institutions now, and they're premised off of, this discord. Like, when you go into a situation where there is some issue in the family, what they're going to tell you is you need to get as adversarial as possible. Because there's no presumption of 50-50 custody, which I believe is the key to at least beginning to, decentivize the situation. Instead, it's like, all right, well, you guys are going to have to fight over custody, so why don't you get all the dirt you can and just hit them as hard as possible. And if you don't have enough dirt, you can make some up because there's really no consequences.
That is the most succinct articulation of the cancer, which is this moment in family court. You are clearly not only an expert, but your reasonableness and your explanations are very thorough and clear. Please tell us how you have survived and what you can share with people who are waking up to this nightmare right now. Perhaps with the awareness maybe you're the first person they've heard talk about this and explain the nightmare they're in.
Sure. Well, thanks for your kind words. To add to that, I've only walked down a path that many have bled on before me. And unfortunately, that's how I've learned some of these things. But I think that's also something that can be helpful in knowing that you're not alone. Nobody is really alone in this, because this happens everywhere, in every country, everywhere in the world. Parental alienation is a phenomenon that can happen even in a household where everything seems okay. And now, as we're learning more about pathologies and, mental illness and trauma and generational trauma and all these things, we're starting to see just how, once it becomes institutionalized, how much worse it gets. And so every story is different, but a lot of the themes are the same. One thing is, I don't know what's the opposite of a golden thread, maybe a bloody thread, but everything is still threaded through. Every single person who's going through this, there's something in common. And that is how you can find strength, because while there's something in common, that gives us the opportunity to find ways to heal. That gives us opportunities to find ways to hope. That gives us ways to come up with collaborations and ways to possibly come up with new solutions, whether it's at a legislative level, whether it's at an individual level, just surviving. That's the way that you should look at it. And there's many ways you can go online right now, and you can go to Facebook groups. There's lots of organizations. I was just in a conference in Washington, D.C. just last month with an organization called I Stand that focuses only on international abduction. I'm also a member of the Fathers' Rights Movement, which was started by Thomas Fidler from Alaska. And they focused a lot on, reforming legislature, including in Kentucky, where they had the presumption of 50-50 rebuttable custody. And that's a remedy against incentivizing, again, these types of custody issues.
Would you explain that? Those
Sure.
legal terms might
Sure.
not yet be familiar. They may become familiar to people, but they may not be familiar yet for people.
Sure. So the basic idea is that a child is 50-50, right? Biologically, if we just start with biology. And there have been throughout time, there have been different ways that children have been appropriated by their parents. Prior to the 18th century, it was maybe the father who kind of had ownership over the child, if that's the word you want to use, because children were considered more of like property. As things evolved and, we had these different waves of feminism, which was important to, deal with some of the inequities and inequalities that were happening. What happened then was a shift towards what they call the tender years doctrine, where there was just this made up idea that because of the maternal bond, they therefore defaulted as the better parent. And so that's become kind of dominant in many ways, and that's been exploited. The truth is, both parents have the opportunity to be a great parent. And what studies have shown is that when both parents are equally involved in a child's life, they have the best opportunity to succeed. And so...
And what parent wouldn't want the best opportunity for their child to succeed under any circumstances?
Right. And so rather than just saying the default of 50-50, to acknowledge the fact that there are parents that are not good parents, that there might be situations where it's not, safe for a child to be with one parent, we use the word presumption. So the presumption here is that it is safe, that both parents are capable. And then we also use the word rebuttable, which means you still have the opportunity to look into that case and say, hey, that my other parent is, they're compromised, or there's something about them where we need to take a look at this and 50-50 may not be the best solution. And that's kind of the compromise that we've been able to come with in the legal language. So it's like yes.
For clarification, you've just informed me that perjury is rewarded.
Right.
If the rebuttable presumption is 50-50, isn't there further incentive to further create false allegations?
There can be. Yeah.
And if there's one scenario in which false allegations are flowing freely, what's to say that were there 50-50, this would be any better or different?
Well, the thing is, I mean, that's a good question. I can't fully answer it without getting too cynical. What I would say is at least even having a starting point of 50-50 in the language is a good start, because I think a lot of times parents aren't necessarily as, malevolent as it ends up becoming in the end. I'd still like to be optimistic that if things fall apart between two people and they have a child involved, they might not necessarily need to go full-blown war on each other, or there'd be ways to mitigate and de-escalate that. Whereas we have a system right now that does the opposite. As far as false allegations and perjury go, I think the solution is simple. We have to criminalize false allegations.
Do they do that anywhere in the world?
I don't know. It doesn't really seem so. The problem is we don't even really have the benefit of being able to tell, because the family courts themselves, shield us from being able to look at that. If it was any other case, it was a normal, justice system, then we would have a much better shot. But the family court, by having these, sidelined parallel rules almost, they're able to avoid that scrutiny, and again, that's a problem under the premise of so-called confidentiality.
One of the things that's the most shocking to most people that we talk to is the circumstance that were the things that are allowed to happen in family court happening in the business world, they would be illegal.
Absolutely.
And actionable.
A lot more people would be in jail, that's for sure.
That someone is doing something that were it not your family, but your business, they would go to jail. But the family courts allow them to act Bernie Madoff-like.
Completely. Well, the thing is, again, it's because, there's matching funds that are happening, right? Like if the government was able to get, 100%, like the same amount of money when you and I have a fallout with our business dealings and the compensations related to that, then probably they'd be, turning it into a mafia also. I think legislative reform is the way to go as far as that goes. But in the meantime, to get even to that level, we need to increase our awareness. We need to be able to share these stories. We need people to be aware of the damage being done and how that's relevant and how it is a societal issue. It's not just some domestic issue, because these things are going to spill out. And I don't think the government has any business making a business out of, the disillusion of family, which is what they've done.
Because the price is borne on the backs of our children.
Absolutely.
With the new administration coming in the United States, how would that, how would that affect everything going on that you're trying to do?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, I can't speak to the specifics of this administration yet. I would say that in general, the Democratic Party has been largely responsible for, shoring up some of these institutions. And what we've seen on the conservative side is that they seem to pay more attention to the idea of, keeping family together rather than focusing on individual rights to the extent that, family ends up being torn apart. So I'm a little bit wary as far as, some of the acts, like, for example, the Violence Against Women Act that Biden was a co-signer for. While it certainly was helpful as far as creating a shield, because domestic violence, especially when it comes to physicality, has been something that, it seems like it's more profound, or I don't know what word to use exactly, because when you look at domestic violence, there's so many different levels of domestic violence. But when it comes to, some of the physical things that happen, it seems like women do need some sorts of protection, and it was important to bring this up considering the history of, citizenship and things like that. At the same time, that kind of removed due process right there, that act. That allowed false allegations, So, yeah, no, please.
We have a question from a listener. How do we get the government to listen to us?
Well, I think everybody has a congressman, and you can start with either the state assemblies, or you can go to your House of Reps, or you can write letters to your senators. There's other ways to get awareness going, I guess, within the school systems and things like that, But it really does come down to finding an advocate within the government locally, and seeing if they are willing to sponsor a bill. And there's already bills out there. I think one thing, again, is the presumption of 50-50 is a good starting point for a lot of people. I think right now it's on the ballot in over a dozen states. I think 4 states have done it so far. This is
I did not know that. How would you go about dealing with like depression or wanting to end it all when you're going through this?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that question. It's a really important one. I think one thing that happens is a feeling of hopelessness. I went through that myself. And when you feel hopeless and you've lost everything, people lose their homes, their jobs. I mean, these types of allegations can really stick. Then, sometimes self-medicating and deviant behavior can manifest as like just a way to try to deal with what's happening. And then that makes it even worse, and it becomes the cycle. I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm taking a grief program with an organization called the International Support Network of Alienated Families. It's ISNAF. And we talk it's a 7-week course, or not course, but we meet up online with other parents, and we talk about these, and we talk about tools and self-healing and things like that. And that's just one example. I think getting therapy, if it's possible, is helpful. The main thing is learning how to take care of yourself first. A lot of times what happens is people run around trying to do everything they can within the system just to fight to have access to their child, and then they neglect themselves further. And there are plenty of ways to reach out within the community to try to heal yourself. There's a lot of good literature out there. Educating yourself on, parental alienation itself. If there's a lot of different books and studies, and they'll tell you about the effects on, the targeted parent. And once you start learning these symptoms and understanding them, then you can address them. And in the process of doing inner work, you might start to understand how you ended up in this situation to begin with, and that might inform your decisions going forward. That's a little abstract. I would say more than that, just some of the basics are just, exercise, meditation, eating clean, forgiving yourself. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I fell off the wagon on on a sad day or a sad moment of my life when I felt all alone. And I actually did a little bit of suicide counseling for some people, and that was helpful too, but that got really emotionally intense. That kind of shifted me towards social work and being, involved in these awareness things. And even this conversation, being here with you guys right now, just came from, posting on Facebook. So it could be as simple as that.
Please tell us about your girls.
Well, Maya and Ahana are now 6, and the other one's going to be 8. They were 1 and 3 when I lost them. I dramatically lost them. My oldest one was on my lap when the Indian police came and took me away. And it's difficult because I don't really, I can't really imagine too much about them because they were so little. I guess one thing I would say is I wasn't really, like, fatherhood was something that I didn't really think about too much. When it happened, it was like really beautiful. And like when my first daughter was born and I held her in my hands, it was like this amazing love that I never thought I would ever, I just didn't even know, like I didn't know what I didn't know. And then I can't say that I really, really wanted her until she came about, and then that connection was there. But the irony to me is my second child, I really, really did want her because now I was in love with having children and being a father. And she's the one who I don't know at all because she was 1 when she was taken. So, depending on the age and what level of contact you have is going to really inform, how you need to deal with the process, because it can be so different. I have a friend who has limited contact with teenage daughters, and, half the time they hate him. And, it's really brutal for him. He has to hear horrible things from them. Whereas for me, I don't even know what's going on. So I have that horrible silence, of just not knowing. And I guess, I don't know. That's a tough one.
Thank you for sharing your powerful and profound story. We've run out of time. You've been extremely generous. We didn't even address the issues of the international abduction, the Hague Convention, and the fact that India is a non-signer to the Hague Convention, and even what the Hague Convention is. Please come back and visit with us again.
I would love to, and I appreciate very much that you guys took the time to have me here and do what you're doing. And I think this is a perfect example that you've been able to take your skills in broadcasting and being able to set this up and utilize that to further this platform so that others can, become aware and heal. I mean, right now, this exchange that we're having, it's helping us heal as well. And so thank you guys very much for that.
That's the last word. Thank you very much. Let's get that website up one more time about the international organization that is helping parents who are alienated, isnaf.info. Amit, thank you.
Thank you very much. You guys have a good day.
My greatest moments didn't come from my greatest moments. My greatest moments came from my greatest defeat.